Most NBA players go broke within just 5 years of retirement. In fact, athletes in general struggle to keep themselves afloat after they leave the game they love. We tend to focus on the top dogs in the sport like LeBron, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, but then we forget that the average NBA career is only around 4.5 years. Nearly 80% of all pro athletes end up going broke at some point after their time is done, and basketball definitely contributes to that number. A Sports Illustrated article gave some data that around 60% of NBA players have some financial hardships after retiring, which is still an incredibly alarming rate. But how can this be? Nowadays, players can be paid millions of dollars per year for simply playing a bench role. In fact, the minimum salary for a rookie is currently sitting at just a little over $1.1 million. And of course, in these days of NIL, players can make much more than that off of their name and likeness before even going pro, which has its own effects. But without further ado, let's look at the many reasons why so many NBA players go broke. And before we get into NBA talk, we have to take a step back and look at the journey that an athlete must go on to even get to the pro level. Out of the hundreds of thousands of high school hoopers, less than 20,000 make it to the college level in any division, and only around 1% of those players make it any further. There are only 60 draft picks every year, which is more so compared to what the NFL or the MLB, but even many of those picks don't pan out. Sure, there are a few undrafted hidden gems, but they don't come in large numbers. You probably get the point now. It's pretty hard to get your way into the NBA. And once a player gets into the league, it appears to have all paid off when they sign their first contract and, of course, get their first check. But it just isn't that easy. Most of the top guys who enter the league enter it young. First overall picks time and time again are 19-year-old kids who just have so much potential that it's mouth-watering for NBA teams. Because they are so young, they may not have the financial education or the financial literacy that is needed when they are given these large sums of money. Investments, taxes, and smart spending should all be taken into account when getting your first big contract. But that is not exactly taught in schools, and many players just don't have the support system around them that they truly need. As a result, new players tend to overspend in areas that are not at all necessary. The long-term effects are shocking, and many players have to learn about the importance of financial literacy and awareness the hard way. I mean, Charles Barkley himself stated that he was an idiot when it came to spending his money. When he first got into the league, he bought 3 or 4 cars, and most NBA players have done the same.
But I tell these guys, you know, Shannon, when I first was an idiot when I got my money, I had like 3 or 4 cars.
Like Shaq, who bought 3 Mercedes-Benzes with his first contract, or Luka Doncic and Damian Lillard, who both bought Porsches. These are some extreme examples because their careers have worked out, but what if a one-and-done player does this? That is where the real problem starts. After talking about his own expenses, he went on to add, "You're 20. When you're 55, how much money are you going to have left?" Antoine Walker is a good example of an NBA player turning their millions into absolutely nothing. Over the course of his career, Walker made $108 million, and with that money, he lived a luxurious lifestyle, but maybe just a little bit too much. Reportedly, Walker couldn't keep a closed fist at times, invested in poor real estate, and as many players do, had a gambling problem. Walker, otherwise known as employee number 8, retired from the league in 2008, and just a couple years later, he was filing for bankruptcy. Luckily, Walker had gotten himself back on his feet by starting a financial service firm to help athletes stay away from the same pitfalls that he fell into, and he serves as a caution to current young players of what not to do when you hit it big. But his story isn't the only one. Chris "Birdman" Anderson grappled with investments and expenses gone awry. Delonte West has struggled with mental health and a lack of a support system, which has led to homelessness. And I mean, Allen Iverson himself dug himself into a hole after spending tens of thousands at strip clubs and spending way too much on things that he just didn't need. One simple yet overlooked reason for this is taxing and hidden expenses. On the outside, it looks like these players take millions and lose it all in the blink of an eye, but that is only partially the case. The impact that taxes have on a player's salary can be massive, especially if they're playing in certain places. Federal US income taxes can take away up to 37% of a person's salary, and in many cases, there are state taxes as well. While you may get lucky with states like Texas, if you go to a state like California or New York, you have an additional 10 to 13% if you are in the highest bracket. and many of these players are. Have a look at Anthony Davis's salary before he went to Dallas, of course. Out of the $62 million per year he was making when he signed a 3-year deal with the Lakers, almost $23 million of that went to federal taxes, $4 million to state taxes, and millions to other various expenses. Like the jock tax, which forces players to pay state taxes in the state where they play a game, or his agent's fee, which was nearly $2 million. Overall, it's pretty hard to account for everything that goes into play, but that is why, especially nowadays, players need professional assistance to help them. And if you don't pay these taxes, it can get pretty ugly. Dennis Rodman gave us a good example of this by just not paying them, which resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and former NBA center Randolph Morris had also gotten into some trouble for not paying his taxes. And it isn't out of their control, but sometimes things just add up and it becomes an unbearable burden. Look at this extreme example with Latrell Sprewell. Sprewell had a controversial career, which has included attacking his coach and just declining a contract which would end his career. And it has certainly not been easy since then. He lost his yacht, he lost his home, he had lost everything just because he couldn't keep up with the expenses. But taxes are not the only thing that NBA players have had trouble taking care of in the past, because throughout their spending, sometimes other things can be forgotten as well, like child support, which has become a major problem for many NBA players who have had numerous children with many different partners over the years. Matt Barnes had to pay over $100,000 in child support after his ex-spouse took him to court. Even current NBA player Jimmy Butler is struggling to find some middle ground with his ex-girlfriend, but at least he's still on payroll and sitting pretty, especially after his new Warriors deal. It can become a pain to deal with for sure, but it is a hole that many players dug themselves throughout their active lifestyles. There are also divorce settlements, which can be even more brutal for players. Michael Jordan, for example, had to pay $168 million to his ex-wife in a divorce settlement. Kent Bazemore, who has just a fraction of what MJ did over the course of his career with brand deals and team salaries, had to pay around $1.5 million to his separated spouse. But players like Jimmy Butler or Michael Jordan are special cases, because Butler has made over $350 million over the course of his career, and MJ has made billions. But to even make that much money, you have to play for a very long time. But history shows that sustaining a long NBA career is harder than you'd think, as the average NBA career is just about 4.5 years. There is a constant need for fresh and feisty players, and unless you can solidify yourself as a consistent role player in the NBA, or of course a superstar, you're gonna have a very hard time holding a spot on an NBA team. Compared to the professionals in other fields like accountants or lawyers, these businessmen save up money over decades to get their kids into college, pay off their mortgages, and save up for retirement, but athletes are just not given that luxury. You're in the league for just 5 years, many may consider that a success, but once you leave the sport, you may be lost until you can find another way to stay afloat. But not everything ends up going to plan. Sometimes there is a set plan or a bright future in sight, and something just takes it all down. There are many different factors that go into a successful career. Did you play for the right coach or for the right organization and with the right players? Those all could make or break your career. But then there are things that are out of a player's control, most of the time. God forbid a player gets injured, but it happens. Players like Yao Ming and Brandon Roy could have had a few more years to dominate the league, but those years were barred by injuries. These are extreme examples though, because the everyday bench player can also go through a similar process. Teams are willing to pick up stars who have had a history of injuries because they produce when they're healthy. But a career bench player does not have the same luxury of a safe NBA spot as starters or maybe even role players do. If a team can go out and get a slightly healthier version of pretty much the same player, then they will do that. After all, the NBA is a business. But speaking of businesses that can be ruthless, many players fall into the addiction of gambling, which can be absolutely devastating. Gambling gives off an insane adrenaline rush, especially when putting a lot of money at risk. We literally just saw Jonte Porter get banned from the NBA for betting on games and tipping off sports bettors, which just shows how addicting it can be. Charles Barkley is an appropriate example of gambling once again, as he has been very open about his struggles with it. He confessed to losing around $25 million in Las Vegas, which is just absurd and much more than the average person will ever see in their lifetime. He would play $25,000 per hand with the intention of winning $1 million every time that he went, but we all know how that story goes. He didn't. Even in the past couple of weeks, stories have been coming out about Terry Rozier. Whether or not he is at fault, we really don't know, but it has happened before. But gambling isn't the only bad investment that players struggle with. In fact, sometimes a bad investment isn't an investment at all. It's a person. As they should, many NBA players have advisors that guide them through their journey. Most of these advisors are trustworthy people that try and help their clients succeed. But then there are the bad apples in the bunch. Deceitful agents and advisors have helped create the downfalls of their clients due to money embezzlement, overcharging, or just plain bad investments. Tim Duncan has recently settled a lawsuit with his ex-financial advisor who pleaded guilty to wire fraud. But this happens in every sport, people trying to squeeze every bit of money out of young, rich, and naive stars. All it does is give players more of a reason to be careful with who they keep close to them. But sometimes those people don't have bad intentions, they just expect too much. Growing up around family and friends who didn't have much can certainly play a major part in how you manage your funds and your lifestyles. Eddie Curry was a major example of this. He just couldn't say no. What was a few grand to someone you grew up with? Well, not much for him, but when it builds up over time because you give a few grand to everyone who asks, it becomes a problem. You could probably guess this, but Curry ended up falling into debt. It's a slippery slope because eventually the NBA paychecks are going to stop coming in, and unless you're a LeBron with crazy brand deals or a commentator for ESPN after retirement, you're gonna have some issues keeping yourself afloat. NBA players go broke for all of these reasons and more. Lack of financial knowledge, addictions, and untended responsibilities have given players unnecessary hardships. Additionally, the pressure to look good around the media, the fans, and even your teammates is ever present. For many players, spending the money is almost as important as making it, and that is when they get into trouble. But even though there is all this darkness around debt across sports, there is hope. As time goes on, players become more and more aware of the risks and mistakes of past players. Additionally, many players who have fallen into traps have set up support systems to make sure that other players do not fall into them as well. Financial stability is so important after any career, but after an athletic one, it gets complicated, and that is why so many NBA players go broke. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and give us recommendations for future topics that we should cover in future videos. Thank you for watching Athlete Affluence, and subscribe if you enjoyed.